The Autonomous Region of Tibet. Located in mountainous southwestern China, Tibet is classified as one of China's autonomous regions, a disputed political arrangement. It is debatable whether Tibet or any of the other Chinese regions are actually autonomous. The legal structures actually allow for very little self governance, and most new initiatives require approval from the Chinese central government. Tibet has been an independent entity through much of its history and governed itself as a Buddhist theocracy. Its theocratic political system established the Dalai Lama as both the head of the state and the religious leader of the Tibetan people. Tibet has had a complicated history with China. This is as true of its early history as it is today. In its early history, Tibet was an independent kingdom with its unique type of Buddhism as its state religion. It was during this era that a system of Lamaism, a hierarchy of monks or other religious leaders, took hold. China's influence in Tibet waxed and waned during the later years of the kingdom in the 10th century. The Mongols subsumed Tibet into their empire during the first part of their conquests in the 13th century. However, in the 15th century, the Mongols gave considerable local authority to the Dalai Lama, making him the spiritual leader as well as a powerful political figure. Tibet came under the control of China during the Qing dynasty, when imperialist rule ended in China in 1911. Tibet began to once again assert its independence. Chinese, British, and Tibetan officials met and came up with an agreement that partitioned Tibet into Inner Tibet, which would be controlled by China, and Outer Tibet, which would be independent. China later indicated its intention to control all of Tibet, a move greatly resented by the Tibetan people. When communists took control of China in 1949, the Dalai Lama was originally allowed control over domestic affairs, while China would control all other government functions. The Chinese government then took steps to greatly reduce the powers of the Dalai Lama and the Panchen Lama, the spiritual leader. With the intention of spreading communism to Tibet, China destroyed monasteries, religious symbols and icons, and other long-practiced ways of life were threatened. The Tibetans considered the Chinese political dominance a cruel and invading force. Monasteries were burned, monks were beaten or imprisoned, and Buddhism was brutally suppressed. Tibetans revolted in 1956. Backed by the United States, the revolt continued even as China indicated it would suspend the transformation of Tibet. China brutally crushed the revolt in 1959, leaving tens of thousands of Tibetans dead or imprisoned. The Dalai Lama and thousands of Tibetans fled to Dharamsala? I'm going to say that's how it's pronounced, but double check me. Dharamsala, India, where they established a government in exile. At this point, China had a firm grip on Tibet, and in 1965, the reorganization of Tibet into a Chinese socialist region began there in force. During the 1980s and early 1990s, China expressed some willingness to relent its authoritarian control over Tibet. However, they demanded that the Dalai Lama renounce claims of Tibetan independence, which he refused. Demonstrations and continued violence occurred throughout this period. Chinese-Tibetan relations were further damaged when the Panchen Lama died mysteriously, shortly after criticizing socialist reforms in Tibet. The Panchen Lama is the next highest Buddhist official under the Dalai Lama. There is now a controversy with the Chinese government over the selection of the 11th Panchen Lama. China and Tibet both claimed the authority over choosing the Panchen Lama, and each named a different person to take on the role. The situation illustrates the conflict over the minds of the people of Tibet. In 2008, a peaceful protest led by Buddhist monks turned violent. Chinese authorities responded with a harsh crackdown. The world's attention was focused on China at the time because of the Olympic Games, which were underway in Beijing. China has often been a target for protests because of its human rights violations against Tibetans and other minority groups. Little attention was drawn to Tibet during the 2008 Olympic Games. China wanted to showcase its advancements in industrial development and culture, and did not want the world to focus on the issues with Tibet or any other part of China. The population of Tibet is only about 3 million. They mainly live in the mountain valleys, below 7,000 feet. The Tibetan economy is dominated by subsistence agriculture. Due to limited arable land, the primary occupation of the Tibetan Plateau is raising livestock. The most important crop in Tibet is barley, and dough made from barley flour, called tsampa, is the staple food of Tibet. This is either rolled into noodles or made into steamed dumplings called momos. Meat dishes are likely to be yak, goat, or mutton, often dried or cooked into a spicy stew with potatoes. Mustard seed is cultivated in Tibet and therefore features heavily in its cuisine. Yak yogurt, butter, and cheese are frequently eaten, and well prepared yogurt is considered something of a prestige item. Butter tea is a very popular drink. In the past couple of decades, China has softened its treatment of Tibetans and restored some of the monasteries. China has also moved thousands of ethnically Chinese people into Tibet to shift the ethnic balance of the population. A major rail line now directly connects Beijing with Lhasa, Tibet. Lhasa will soon have a majority Chinese population with cultural similarities that reflect more attributes of China proper than Tibet. The Tibetans who live there are being compromised simply by population dilution. China wants to maintain the mountainous rural region with little inhabitable land area and very few people as a buffer state between India and the Han Chinese heartland of China proper. Tibet is also becoming more important to the government of Beijing and the business people in Shenzhen and Shanghai. The mountains of Tibet potentially hold vast amounts of natural resources that could support the growing industrial economy in China, which is based on manufacturing goods for the global export market. China will continue to see it that Tibet becomes economically integrated with the rest of China, in spite of the cultural differences that may exist.